Hey there, students. Forgive my corona hair, but here is a special guest. He looks very small here, but he's quite large. So he's here. All right, well, anyway, let's talk about the Great War. Today, I think we're going to get to, I don't know, we'll see. So at the beginning of World War I, Germany and France had two different plans for what exactly they were going to do. One was called Plan 17, and the other was called the Schlieffen Plan, or the Schlieffen. I'm pretty sure it's Schlieffen Plan. Plan 17 was France's military plan at the beginning of World War I. Knowing these two plans are test questions, so you want to probably take note of it. Since the embarrassing defeat to the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, the French are now looking to get revenge. Like I said in the German unification notes, France really spends those 50 years in between the German unification and World War I kind of just simmering in their anger and their bitterness towards what Prussia did at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. So the loss of the coal-rich territories of Alsace and Lorraine, it also makes France better because they want those territories back. So their plan is to take those militarily through, fighting to take back those areas of land from Germany. So their plan, Plan 17, is not to invade Germany necessarily, but to take back the territories that were taken from them in the Franco-Prussian War. So as Gimli says here, certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for? Right? So Plan 17 is implemented as an offensive to take back Alsace-Lorraine, as I just said. The German defense of this territory turns out to be much, much greater than the French expected. And so it is a humongous, humongous failure for the French. Plan 17 is a huge failure. And so that leads to Germany's turn, which is the Schlieffen Plan. Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. I usually show that movie after the final exam, but we're obviously not going to be together at that time, so won't be able to do that, unfortunately. The Schlieffen Plan is essentially Germany's plan to cut around France's main offensive line, like you see here on the map. This yellow line with the red dots is France's main offensive/defensive line. So Germany's plan is to cut through Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg to get, flank around France's forces to get to Paris. So Germany believed that they could take Russia in about 6 weeks to mobilize their troops and supplies. Germany plans to attack France through the neutral nation of Belgium, as I already said, and then turn eastward to deal with the Russians. They did not, this is where they mess up, they did not expect the British to show up, however. So the Schlieffen Plan will also be a failure. So Plan 17 and the Schlieffen Plan are going to be failures. Now, within these two plans, we have 5 battles that you want to remember. And you don't need to remember each battle separately, but you do need to remember the general name that's given to the first 5 battles and who wins them, right? So these are called the Battle of the Frontiers, right? And these are really the first 5 engagements on the Western Front, which take place in August of 1914. Now, you're probably looking at this and being like, how do I write this in my notes? Well, you would have this bullet point, then you would go over a little bit. You'd have number 1, and on that same line, you would write French to withdraw. Basically telling you that in the first battle, the French lose and they withdraw. All right, so the French begin the war with an attack on the Alsace territory at Mulhouse. The town was captured, but the German reinforcements end up taking it back, and the French retreat. Then you'd go down one line, you go number 2, and on that same line you'd write German counterattack, push the French back into France. That's how a smart person would do this. I have seen it where kids legitimately had it where it was number one, and then on the next line, like in the bottom right corner, they had French to withdraw. Like, sometimes I wonder about people and the future of America, but then I realize somebody's got to be the factory worker. Just saying. Number 3, the Battle of Ardennes. Germany pushes deeper into France. August 21st to 23rd, French forces attack the Germans. They're bogged down through thick fog. German force the French to withdraw after several days of heavy fighting. So you can kind of see that the underlying portion is like the battle and then kind of a summary of what the end result is. Battle of Chalero, August 21st to 23rd. The French retreat yet again. And the 5th battle, the Battle of the Mons, the 23rd to the 24th. The Mons battle signified the first engagement between British and German forces, and that's where the Germans really didn't expect it. And so you kind of see that throughout the first 4 battles, Germany is just dominating France, which I don't really know why that's a big shock, because they destroyed the French the last time they fought them. So I don't really know why the French thought that things would be different, even though they don't really even change their strategy all that much. I mean, at this point, France is definitely more modern than they were in the Franco-Prussian War, but still, I don't really know what they were thinking. They just must be that arrogant. The Germans doubled down the strength of their enemy and attacked headlong into the French-British positions. And basically, those first few battles go nowhere. You know, the French try, they fail. The Germans try. They have a lot of success, but ultimately they're unable to get to Paris, so it is a failure for the Germans as well. So pretty much nothing happens in the first 5 battles of Veld vor Vannes. The French should have learned a couple of lessons from this battle. Number 1, they still have not learned the lesson that they should have learned in the Franco-Prussian War, and that is, do not wear brightly colored clothing in the middle of combat. The weapons are way too accurate now, so you really can't go in with bright blue and red clothing, or you're just going to be like, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb, and they're going to know exactly where to shoot. So the French blindly run into German machine gun fire positions and crossed areas heavily concentrated on by artillery. So the French are quite literally still using tactics from like the Napoleonic Wars. Meanwhile, the Germans are using like modern tactics like artillery, you know, big cannons that can shoot artillery shells this big, like a mile or 2 away. And I mean, you get hit by one of those shells, you simply cease to exist. You know, like it's a big explosion. So the French really should have learned those 2 lessons. Don't wear bright clothes, and you need to develop modern military strategies or you're going to get creamed. Battle of the Frontiers, Plan 17, the Schlieffen Plan, ended as failure for France and a disappointment for Germany. Neither of them achieved the goals that they wanted to reach. France did not take Alsace and Lorraine, and Germany was not able to get to Paris. So by September of 1914, neither side could force the other to move, so each dug trenches. For the next 4 years, the troops would fight in these trenches, and the battle lines will not move that much. You know, maybe one day your army might gain a mile, maybe less, and then the next day you'd lose that mile and you'd be back where you started. And that's very largely how the entire war takes place. It's pretty much happening in all of the same trenches. All right, so kind of looking at what the warfare of World War I looked like. I give you those first 5 battles of World War I on the Western Front to kind of like set up the stage there. Now we're going to look at trench warfare, then we're going to look at other fronts, some of the smaller, less important fronts, and then we're going to wrap up the last half of the notes is with the Western Front and really getting into the meat of the war where most of it's going down. So this is a war of attrition, a war with the intention to win through large amounts of human death. till the enemy surrenders. Kill as many as necessary. So the plan is, you begin to understand that you're not going to win the war by the traditional means of taking over the enemy's capital. The only way that you're going to win is to bleed them white, to basically kill so many of their soldiers that they run out and they surrender because they don't have anybody else left to fight. That is what war of attrition is. It's where you recognize you can't win by taking their capital. The only other way to win is to make them bleed so much that they surrender. So from 1914 to 1917, soldiers on each side of the line fought in their trenches. They fired artillery shells into the enemy position and grenades and mortar shells. However, each time military leaders ordered a full-fledged attack, the soldiers were forced to leave the safety of their trenches and cross what they call no man's land, which is the space in between the two trenches, and it is basically a hellscape where good luck surviving it. I mean, you're charging a crater-filled, muddy field with bullets flying at you, artillery shells firing at you, mortar shells firing at you, airplanes could be strafing the ground by you, and you're supposed to run through this hellscape that's about the size of 1 to 2 football fields with all these deadly things being shot at you, and somehow enough of you are supposed to survive and get to the other trench and then take over that trench. I mean, just imagine crossing a field, a barren wasteland full of barbed wire, dead bodies, mud, giant craters made by artillery shells that have gone off, and you're supposed to cross this with machine guns firing at you, artillery shells, which again are like this big, fired from cannons like way far away, mortar shells, which are like kind of like, keep it simple, a little metal tube that launches a little bit bigger than a grenade. You're supposed to survive all of this and make it to the other side and then somehow have enough troops to take the enemy trench. It's like, I don't know. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that is intense. Right? So to overtake the other trenches side, the men had to cross no man's land, which again is the space in between the two trenches. They call it no man's land because no man can survive it, supposedly. Of course, some armies did succeed crossing no man's land, and they did take the enemy trench. But again, the thing is, like the next day, you probably would lose that position. So, I mean, you're going to be seeing dead bodies that have been there for sometimes months, maybe even years, because the war is really taking place in the same trenches because not a whole lot of land is gained or lost at any time. So out in the open, thousands of soldiers raced across the barren land in hopes of reaching the other side. Often, most were mowed down by machine gun fire and artillery before they even got close. A machine gun is a fully automatic gun. It's like, it's dangerous. All right, there's a high chance you're going to die. So I have a little video kind of illustrate this a little bit. Hopefully there are not ads. Of course there aren't. I shouldn't have even hoped. Some kind of video game.
Life in a trench, I'd like to explain in one word. Horrific. It's mud, it's death, it's rats, it's stench, and soldiers develop an attitude in a trench that everybody is going to die.
Life in the trench was abysmal. There were several lines of trenches, and the front line trenches, of course, were the most dangerous because they were constantly under fire. Into them!
The Germans dug assiduously, building dry, safe, and comfortable trenches for themselves with bunkers that actually had electricity and sometimes running water. The British and French, who were convinced that they were never going to be there for that long, didn't spend nearly the same effort. And so their trenches tended to be muddy and wet and not that safe.
Disease ran rampant. It was very difficult to get any sort of sleep, a decent hot meal, keep your clothes dry, and more importantly, to keep your sanity.
There were so many health problems of just simple disease that took much more men out of combat than direct fire.
I think one word that would surprise people about life in a trench: boredom. A lot of time is spent just sitting, cleaning tools, and being scared to death the battle's going to start any minute.
It was just the day-to-day monotony, being trapped in this very small space and fighting for a war that's really fought in inches.
The idea of open warfare, of fighting out into what they called no man's land, wasn't working. The technology of the war had advanced so much with machine guns, artillery that could lob shells a mile. It became mostly a defensive war early on, and as a defensive war, you wanted to protect your troops, so the miles and miles of trenches were built.
There were often bodies buried in the sides of trenches, bodies lying out in the open in front of the trenches. The soldiers were experiencing not only the war that they were fighting at the moment, but the war that had been going on throughout those trenches for all of the years of the war.
A young lieutenant writes his mother and says, "I haven't been killed yet, but it's only a matter of time." That's typical of the way soldiers felt about life in the trench. You just did it. You existed day to day, tried to go on, keep your chin up, but one day, the bullet was going to have your name on it, and you were going to perish. You weren't going home.
It's depressing. I mean, that's war, though. I mean, that's what it is. All right, so you can kind of see, like what they said, the Germans had a lot of like wooden fortified trenches that had sometimes like running water. It was a lot more sophisticated. The Germans kind of really prepared themselves. The English and French never really felt like they were going to be there that long, so their trenches usually would have quite a bit of mud on the bottom, which would lead to things like trench foot, which is definitely not something that you want. Basically, you can't just take your shoes off in the middle of combat because, well, what if the war starts? You got to get up. You're going to run across no man's land with no shoes on. So like you got to keep your shoes on whenever the bottom of your trench is wet. You ever stepped in like a puddle, you have all that moisture in your shoe and you can't take it off for it to dry out, then your foot's kind of stuck in there in a moist place for long periods of time, which can develop something called trench foot, which I do have pictures of later on in the notes. So these are just some images of trenches. You can see some of these are really not that sophisticated. But I mean, it'd be a lot of work to develop them. And, oh, sorry. So, I mean, really, an artillery shell can get lobbed in there. I mean, it's not necessarily that you are impervious to death even in the trench itself. So it's a dangerous time. You're just kind of sitting there waiting to die, basically, for years, months, weeks. Probably wouldn't be in the same place for years, but you know what I mean. So yeah, you kind of already saw it, but that next slide, that is trench foot. This is trench foot. You can see that it is quite disgusting. You probably have to have these feet amputated off so that it doesn't spread, so it doesn't lead to something worse. But yeah, a lot of men are going to be taken out of combat because of medical problems. This is what their bathrooms looked like. You just kind of dug a trench and you put a little wooden seat, a log for you to sit on, and you just right into the trench. I'm sure that it smelled lovely. I used to think that this was this guy like doing something to this guy, but this is him wiping his butt with some kind of a tool, right? Kind of disgusting. One more butt picture. There is actually a story of the bench snapping and the soldiers falling in to the trench full of poop. I watched a documentary. They recolored a bunch of and remastered a bunch of footage from World War One, and they talked about this. It's a very good documentary. Can't show it because it's technically rated R. It was really good. It was really good. This is kind of the layout of trenches. You can see no man's land. It's got a lot of craters. You see barbed wire. You know, like, why would they have barbed wire? Well, you ever tried to run through barbed wire? It doesn't go well for you. So if the Germans can stop you here, you're stuck there while they're right here shooting machine guns at you. So it's very beneficial to have barbed wire in front of your trench because it slows down the enemy, which gives you more time to kill them. So the barbed wire was feet deep and impossible for troops to pass. A lot of times soldiers would carry barbed wire to help them cut the barbed wire. But, you know, again, that's a long time you're sitting there waiting while there's machine guns and things shooting at you. So ideally you would have your artillery, you know, your cannons would aim at the enemy's barbed wire to try to break it up. But not all of the artillery was really effective at destroying barbed wire. So sometimes you're walking into really a death trap where you're expecting the barbed wire to be destroyed, but it isn't. You can see this obviously depicting a German trench here. They had wood. It went pretty deep. Sometimes they'd have rooms. Again, you know, the Germans would even sometimes have running water. You have a concrete defensive bunker. Sometimes the Germans will actually have quite a bit of concrete bunkering. And you have way back here artillery. You can see that there are layers to a trench. It's not like there's just one trench. It really was, like, this is a simplified diagram. Like, it really was kind of like a maze in a lot of ways, right? A lot of ways. You notice that this is a reverse trench because, well, if this trench gets taken, then they're going to be fighting over here. You know, they want to have that available. Here we can see some of the weapons that maybe a British soldier would carry. They obviously would not be carrying all of this, right? But if you see a soldier with a helmet like this, you know that they are British. They have shovels for digging trenches, barbed wire cutters, various tools for making trenches, grenades, bayonet. Here's a machine gun. A few water, things to hold food and water. Here we have the French. It's very similar to the British. Here we have the Russians. Now the Russians are going to have, I mean, they're still going to have trench warfare, but it's going to be a lot less. So you'll see things in the Russians things will be a little bit different. Like they'll have, and no, this is not a machine gun. There's no such thing as a fully automatic rifle back then other than the machine gun. Right, so these are still going to be bolt action rifles. This is their bayonet. You know, bolt action meaning you fire, cock it back. You know, you have to cock it every time you shoot to bring the next bullet up into the chamber. They would have more of an emphasis on swords on the Russian front because they weren't always in trenches because the Russian front was so spread out. A sword might be a little bit more effective. But I think we can all agree going across no man's land with a sword is probably not going to end well for you. But in Russia, you know, if you're on cavalry and it's not a trench and there's not a machine gun positioned directly at you, you might see some success there. This is the German helmet. Once they get rid of the spiked helmet, the Prussian spiked helmet, they they eventually realized that this little leather cap doesn't really do much against bullets and shrapnel. Not that helmets are really meant to deflect bullets. A little piece of metal is not going to typically deflect a bullet. Now they are designed to try to ricochet the bullet off, but if it's a direct go, it's not going to stop the bullet. So you'll see the design, there's always like a curve. That is to try to deflect bullets away so that instead of going into your head, it might ricochet off. And same thing for shrapnel. So it's not really meant to block a bullet because that's a little thin piece of metal just isn't going to do that. And you can't have too thick of metal or too much weight up on your head for obvious reasons. I see the Germans have bayonets. This is what a German grenade looks like. This gun might look familiar if you're really into Star Wars. If you get rid of this. The artillery really came in various sizes. I mean, there's an artillery shell right there. It's very big. You don't want to get hit by one of those. Or, I mean, it would be a quick death, though. Alright, so we are going to, well, let's see how we're doing on time. Let's see how we're doing on time. 26 minutes. Let's see, I feel like there was a video that I missed. Maybe not. Could have sworn there was, though. Maybe it's on one of these. It's here somewhere. Maybe it's on this. No. Okay. If we come across it, we come across it. If we don't, we don't. It's just the way it is. I could have sworn there was another video. I don't know. It is what it is. Well, I think we can go for a little bit longer. The Serbian front, this front of the war is pretty short. It's pretty simple, to be honest with you. You know, Serbia is really what started the whole thing, so it makes sense to look at what goes on that front. You know, what happens to Serbia. And this is really where we go into details that I'd actually be confident to say that no other class you take is probably going to go into this much detail on World War I. Most classes are just going to look at the Western Front. In this class, we're going to go through and give you a full scope of the war, which I think is really cool, because I wish that somebody would have done this when I was in high school, because it's, I mean, even if you don't remember the specific details, it does give you a sense that this was a broader war than you would have if you were just looking at the Western Front. Like, this really does cover a lot of territory. So August 12th, the Austrian forces invaded the highly mountainous country of Serbia. The Austrian army is obviously much better than Serbia in both number and skill, but the Austrians could only invade with half their force due to the fact that they are fighting other countries. They are fighting the Russians. They are going to be fighting a little bit of the French and the English, maybe not so much the English. So they're divided. Their military is divided. So that gives Serbia here a fighting chance. The Romanians are technically on Austria's side in the beginning, but they're later going to switch sides. So even later in the war, they're going to be fighting Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Serbia, Greece. Like, all of these new nations are going to have a problem with them. So the Serbians led an unsuccessful invasion of Austria. I personally think about that. I'm like, are you stupid? Serbia? Like, really? You thought you could offensively take on Austria? Like, it's different. Offense is different than defense in so many ways. Most importantly, in this example, offensive is much more deadly. Like, you are much more likely to lose more men on an offensive assault than defending a position. So that's really ballsy for Serbia. So they lose. Then the Austrians go on the offensive and capture the Serbian capital by December 7th. The Serbians then get backup by Montenegro and supplies by the French and the Greeks, and then recapture their capital and push the Austrians and the Hungarians back out of Serbia by Christmas. Then it falls into trench warfare over winter. Tens of thousands of soldiers will die. There will also be a lot of starvation and suffering happening with the Serbian civilians. You can see a picture here of a mom grieving over her child who has died from starvation. So really, it's pretty rough for the Serbians. Their nationalism is really tested, and their front really is a back and forth. So basically, Serbia tries an offense, they fail, then Austria goes on the offensive and they succeed, and then the Serbians get back up, and then they take back their capital, and it bogs down into trench warfare. But the Serbian civilians are suffering during that winter because there's a lack of food, and there's a lot of disease being spread around, lots of typhus fever, an epidemic that makes the coronavirus look like a walk through the park. So on October 1st of the following year, 1915, Germany is very upset. Excuse me. Sitting in this recliner makes it to where I get less air in my lungs, but it's so much more comfortable. Which makes me yawn. October 1st, 1915, Germany is upset with Austria's failure. It's like, really? You can't take on Serbia? Like, what is wrong with you? So, like Germany has to do with pretty much all of their allies, as you'll come to find out, Germany has to basically take over and do what their allies were unsuccessful at doing. It's kind of really embarrassing for their allies. Like, Germany, World War I really is kind of Germany versus everybody else because their allies are useless. I mean, Austria couldn't even beat Serbia. That is embarrassing. So the Germans attack from the north and the west, and the Bulgarians attack from the east. And so they will capture the capital 6 days later. That tells you just how embarrassing, like how embarrassed Austria should be that Germany can do what they couldn't do in 6 days. All of Serbia is then under the Central Powers by the end of the month. So in about a month, Germany has all of Serbia in what took, Austria failed at taking in over a year. So what was left of the Serbian army goes through a horrible winter, and they retreat into Macedonia and Albania, which we see Albania right here. Right. So they had the Germans attacking from the north. They had the Bulgarians attacking from the east. So Serbians, they just have to run away. They have to flee. Here we have their retreat. The King of Serbia will lose about 1 million, over 1 million inhabitants during the war, both army and civilian losses, which represents about 27% of its overall population and 60% of its male population. So imagine if 60% of all the males in your country died in less than 4 years. That's a lot of people. That would have such an impact on your economy. Like, your country probably would never recover. And what do you know? Serbia kind of doesn't. So the Serbians flee to Greece, where they recover. And the defeated Serbians are allowed, the defeat of Serbia allows for Germany to build a railroad connecting them to the Ottoman Empire. So now all of these Central Powers are connected, essentially. So it's a huge victory for the Central Powers. This allows them to share supplies and troops via railroad with the Ottoman Empire, which is one of their allies. So then the Serbian front moves to the Balkan region in Greece, which we see here. Right? And the Allies, through the rest of the war, and it really does take the rest of the war, the Allies will very slowly regain Serbia and the Balkan region. September 15th, 1918, which is the last year of the war, they will defeat the Germans at the Battle of Dobropol. And by that's because really by the end of the war, the Germans are pretty exhausted. And so they would have been putting up less of a fight, to be honest with you. They would have had less soldiers. So basically, to summarize the Serbian front, Austria fails, Germany comes in, kicks Serbia's butt, and then slowly, throughout the entire war, they slowly retake Serbia back from Germany. And so by the end, the Serbia is controlled by the Allies again. But again, that's because, that's the whole war. We just went through the entire 4 years of the war on the Serbian front. And so now we'll do the entire 4 years on the Turkish front, and so on and so forth. It would be pretty confusing to go through the war purely chronological, so we look at each front separately. Keep it separate and neat and organized. So the Turkish front is obviously largely going to be fighting the Ottoman Empire, which I just mentioned. Germany defeating Serbia gave them that railroad line to connect their allies together. Again, I've said this before, and it is a test question. The Ottoman Empire is nicknamed the sick man of Europe because it really is on its deathbed. All countries die eventually. Even America will die one day, and it will cease to exist as it is today. It's just what happens. France has undergone so many changes. France has definitely died several times and then been reborn as something different and new. They keep the same name, but it's not really the same country. Not really. So the key, though, is that the Ottoman Turks are going to keep busy a lot of the Allied forces which could otherwise be fighting the Germans. So really the only thing we're going to talk about on this this front is the Gallipoli campaign, and that is run by a man named Winston Churchill, who I have mentioned before, and you want to keep your eye on him because he's going to end up being the Prime Minister of England during World War II. He's a really, 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 really big reason why the British are, see success in World War II and why they are not conquered by Adolf Hitler, right? I told you guys several stories about Winston Churchill earlier in the semester when we were still there together, where, the woman was like, "Winston, you're drunk." And Winston Churchill was like, "That may be true, my dear, but in the morning I shall be sober, and you shall still be ugly." I talked about it during the Renaissance notes when I was talking about what wittiness is. He also was like, one time, one was like, "Winston, if I was your wife, I'd poison your tea," he says. "If I was your husband, I would drink it," because he'd rather be dead than be with her. It's funny. He's a funny guy. Anyway, he does not have success here on the Ottoman Empire front. The goal was to basically cut the Ottoman Empire in half, and they are unsuccessful. Right? So a victory here could mean the waterways from the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea, in which ships could reach the southern ports of Russia near St. Petersburg. The victory would slice Turkey in two pieces, the piece in Europe and the city of Constantinople, which should be familiar to you from the Crusades, would be under Allied control for the first time. It would be under European control for hundreds of years. But unfortunately, it is an Allied failure. Australians do fight a lot on this campaign. And partially why it failed was because the Ottoman Empire really put all of their strength there. Like, this was like one of the main focuses of the Ottoman Empire. Like, this was where the Gallipoli campaign is where the Ottoman Empire put all of their strength, whereas Britain just put a fraction of their strength there. It's kind of like with Austria and Serbia, where, if all of the Austrian military was focused on just Serbia, yeah, they would have beaten them. But they were divided. So the British were divided, and the Ottoman Empire put a lot of emphasis on taking and defeating the Gallipoli campaign, because if they lost, they would have been done. The other part of the Turkish front we want to talk about is the Lawrence of Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, the British officer named T.E. Lawrence, which we see photographed here, hopefully I'm not blocking his face too much, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, that was his nickname, fought with Arab troops in guerrilla warfare against the Ottoman troops. A lot of the people in Saudi Arabia, although they're also Muslim, they didn't necessarily want to be a part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire anymore. There's a lot of differences between Muslim, Islam in Turkey and Islam in Saudi Arabia, and they don't really want to be a part of that anymore, as well as they just want to be their own country again. So T.E. Lawrence, this British commander, kind of organizes the people of Arabia and launches a guerrilla warfare campaign against the Ottoman troops, which is really beneficial for the British because it's not their troops. T.E. Lawrence is using the native population to help defeat Britain's enemy. So he convinced the Arab leaders in the region to coordinate their attacks against Turkish supply lines and weak outposts. They attacked trains and things like that. If you've played the video game Battlefield 1, there's a pretty good storyline with T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, although you play a girl, and that's not historically accurate at all. But anyway, the purpose is it destroys supply lines. It's not like, it's very untraditional warfare. You're going to see a lot more like horseback combat, tank. Well, no, actually you're not going to see tank. That's World War II. You're going to see more horseback with swords and things like that on this front than you would in any other front. By the end of the war, most of the Middle East will be a possession of the British. I'm pretty sure the Arabians didn't realize that they were essentially trading one ruler for another one, but they were. Let's see how we're doing on time. We'll finish with the Italian front. We'll save the Eastern Front for tomorrow. Or I should say Monday. I'll film it tomorrow, but it will be on Monday that we view it. The Italian front has a nickname called the Mountain War, which, by the way, guys, this is where I have made dramatic cuts. Again, this PowerPoint used to be like 600 some odd slides when I got it from Major Miller, the other World Civ teacher. I cut it down dramatically. It usually took almost a day to get through these other fronts because there was just so much. So you're welcome. I personally really find this front to be quite fascinating because, World War I truly is a very unique war. Not really in any other modern war are you going to see people fighting in the snow. Like on top of mountains, fighting in the snow. Like in the top of the Alps, they're fighting in snow trenches. Like, what? Something else of note, you'll notice that a lot of this, you'll see a few automobiles, a few motorcycles, but most of it is still drawn by horse. This position right here cracks me up because these guys would be right on the open and just get shot right away. Really dumb. But anyway, this brings the Italians into the war because the Austrians, again, want that territory they lost during the 7 Years' War, even though Prussia's the one that gave the Italians that territory. But anyway, the Austrians want it back, and which is what this map is showing right there. So the Italian front is fought in the northern Italian Alps. This front is nicknamed the Mountain War. On May 23rd, 1915, Italy joins the war on the Allied side with the hope of gaining the province of Italian names. I'm not even going to try. It's plagued with weather-related deaths, very cold, lots of hypothermia. Look, you are at the top of this huge mountain. I'm sure the oxygen is very thin. There are trenches made out of snow. They have a machine gun. If you die, at least you die like looking at one of the most beautiful views ever. But, you're still going to die. I don't think any of us want to die. And the thing is, like, the human body just isn't made to live at that high of altitude, that cold. So like if you overexert your lungs at this altitude where the air is that thin and it's that cold, the capillaries in your lungs start to burst and your lungs fill with blood and you suffocate and die on your own blood. So in addition to frostbite and hypothermia, you also have a lot of other health threats as well. Still, I love this picture though. I just think like, man, only World War I. Only World War I. Hey, you want to make a snow fort? No, let's make a snow trench. I wonder if anybody made a snowman and like tried to get the other enemy to like shoot. Anyway. So December 13th, 1916 is known as White Friday. No, it is not the same thing as Black Friday. It is a day where 10,000 Italian soldiers were killed by avalanches, because who would have guessed that shooting off guns and mortar shells at the top of mountains with snow who could have thought that that would cause an avalanche? I love this snow leopard. So majestic. So beautiful. Some pictures of the mountain war. Oh, this just looks so miserable. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine how cold and miserable? There's no heating. You can't really light a fire. And like, I mean, you might, but you'd be giving away your position. Like, you might get artillery shelled. You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, there's a fire there. These coordinates, shoot there. Boom, you're dead. You know, like, so like, it's purely miserable. Man. Anyway, there are some photographs of the Italians trying to find the 10,000 soldiers that died in the avalanche. The thing is, you know, I'm going to give you some tips on how to survive an avalanche. Who knows? Maybe I'll save your life one day. If you are about to experience an avalanche, you see it coming, the first thing you want to do is make sure that there are the least amount of things lower down on the mountain than you, because you do not want to be smacked by that wall of snow and then flung into a tree, because you're going to die. If it can't be avoided, it can't be avoided, but you want to try to get somewhere clear. Because here's the thing, you're not going to outrun it. So you might as well try to find somewhere where you're going to get hit and not flung into something else and die. Number 2, you want to scoop your hands like this in front of your face so that when you stop tumbling through the snow, you can create a little air bubble for yourself. And it's just useful to have your hands up here as well and not stuck down here with several, like 10 feet of snow or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, be much more beneficial for you you'd have much more of ability to use your arm and chest muscles if your hands are up here than if they're down here or like this, you know? So at any rate, the last thing is you want to be able to determine which way is up and which way is down, because unfortunately for a lot of these Italians, they were digging to get free of the snow, but they thought they were digging up towards the surface, but instead they were digging down closer to their death, closer to the earth. And so they found their bodies like that. So you want to know which way is up. So the way to do that is to either spit or to use your breath to melt some of the snow, and you just watch where either your spit or the snow goes. Because gravity will always pull the liquid, the water, down. So if you go like, and it melts some of the snow and it starts dripping on your face, then you know, okay, well that way is up. I start digging that way. I am facing up. I am facing towards the sky. It's like I'm laying on my back. If the snow does not drip, it just like kind of like goes down, like going the direction that you're looking, then you know you're facing down. If it goes to the right, then you know that up is that way, and vice versa. So, there are ways to increase your chances of surviving an avalanche. Unfortunately, for these 10,000 Italians, they're not going to be so lucky. So, following White Friday and the horrible thing that is, we have the Battle of Caporetto. That's my attempt at pronouncing it. This is where they first demonstrate the effectiveness of stormtroopers, which in World War I, a stormtrooper is basically just a soldier that has a tank of fuel on their back and a flamethrower. It is very effective at getting people out of bunkers. If there's a machine gun in a cement bunker and you just sneak up on the side, put your flamethrower in there and just activate it, and you get that flamethrower in there, it's very effective. They're in an enclosed cement area and they're all going to burn alive. Or it's also very effective on people that are playing dead. However, you don't want to send in the stormtroopers first, because if that tank of gasoline gets shot, not a good day for you or the people next to you. The Central Powers will lose 70,000 men killed or wounded. The Italians will lose 10,000 killed or wounded. 10,000 killed, 30,000 wounded, and 265,000 captured. So the Italians lose, just like with the Italian unification. The Italians are kind of just really bad at winning battles, and that's really kind of characteristic of Italy any time outside of the Renaissance or Rome. Like World War II, they don't really win much either. Italy kind of just sucks at fighting. No offense, but it's the truth. Battle proved the Italians retreated through the mountain passes and regrouped to stop the slowly advancing Austrians. The Italians, this helps the Allied powers realize that, listen, countries like Italy and Serbia, they're not going to really be able to defeat the might of, say, the Austrians or the Germans unless we help. So the British and the French send reinforcements, and so throughout the war they will slowly regain the parts of Italy that were lost as well, kind of like with Serbia. And you'll notice that these fronts have a lot of similarities. Basically, the Central Powers win for the first half, but then France and England come in and bolster their allies with aid, and then they slowly regain the territories that were lost. So the turning point is the Battle of the Piave River on June 15th to the 23rd in 1918, which is the last year of the war. The Allies launch heavy artillery bombardment on the Austrians. After 1 week, the Allies have recaptured the land that they had lost the previous year. So like with the Serbian front, Italy's going to lose until the other Allied powers get involved. I love this picture because I don't know. Just like looking over this cliff edge, pointed this way, Lord Reginald, boo. Right? I don't know. It cracks me up. So the Austrian military was devastated and their soldiers angry. At 4 years of trench warfare and all the slaughter, they start to surrender en masse and retreat, refusing to fight. The Austrians essentially just give up. So on November 4th, an armistice is signed between Austria and Italy, which is, 2 weeks before Germany surrenders and the war is over. So that is the Italian front. On Monday, we'll talk about the Eastern Front. And I believe there's the other video I think I show later on. Yeah, so we will do the Russian front and we'll do the other fronts, which is really just this slide and my voice. Just this slide and then some pictures. And then we get to the Western Front, which is pretty much the rest of it. A lot of pictures. A lot of pictures. So yeah, that's what's coming up. Make sure you answer your discussion questions. in Canvas. And that you have a jolly good day. Peace out.